Madam President and colleagues, as Vice Chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus, I rise to present SCR 41. SCR 41 commemorates Juneteenth, the 156th anniversary of which is happening this Saturday. As was mentioned in the prayer, Juneteenth marks the day in 1865 when a group of enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, finally learned that they were free from slavery. But woefully, this was almost 2.5 years after President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. As much as Juneteenth represents freedom, it also represents how emancipation was tragically delayed for enslaved people in the deepest reaches of the Confederacy. On January 1863, President Lincoln issued the final draft of the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all persons held as slaves are and henceforth shall be free. Of course, like most laws, there were exemptions, which the Senate attempted to close by passing the 13th Amendment a year later, prohibiting slavery and involuntary servitude in all states, Union and the Confederate. But the amendments were not enacted until 1865. Politics, economics, and the South. Reconstruction, the time after that, focused on rebuilding the Southern economy and society through the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which gave Black people freedom, due process, and the right to vote. But those goals were consistently countered by white supremacists who worked to weaken Black voting in the South by means of gerrymandering, violence, intimidation, and discriminatory provisions around literacy. And those actions ushered in Jim Crow. This is the journey for freedom for Black Americans, a history not taught in schools and not well known by most Americans, even many Black folks. It is a journey filled with delays, false starts, and IOUs. It's a journey that I know a little bit about only because my great-great-great-grandmother, the first person to hold me when I was born, had been born a slave and had been freed by Lincoln. And she had her papers and her Republican registration card to prove it. It is great that the U.S. Senate has passed a bill to make Juneteenth a national holiday. I hope the President signs that bill. What I hope more for are righteous discussions and actions by this body around poverty alleviation, wealth building, equity, and protecting all of our rights to vote, to due process, and to be free. You know, a few weeks ago, my mother was in Whole Foods and she was checking out at the cashiers, who happened to be a Black woman. And as this was going on, she was loading things out of her cart. She turned around and saw this white man and his dog bounding into Whole Foods walking down the aisle. The dog was not leashed. The dog was not a service dog. And they were just happy and shopping. And my mother frowned and furrowed her brow and turned to the cashier to look like, huh? And the cashier turned to her so evenly and said, "They have dominion over themselves." In other words, she was saying, white people are free. And when you know you're free, you act free. It is a bit more unforgiving and complicated to be Black. Our freedom feels tenuous and situational, and that is felt in the fights. So if we are fighting against unjust treatment in the courts, by the state bar, within our prisons, if we are fighting against unfair treatment in our school systems, against inadequate health care, against unfair behaviors by lending institutions or housing providers, against disproportionately unclean water, air, or land, if we are fighting to stay alive, to walk with Skittles or sleep in our bed, to bird watch or ride a bike, to have Bible study in our church or go jogging, or even to breathe, all while being Black, then we are still fighting for that freedom over dominion over ourselves.